Bom, pessoal, bem interessante, né, a palestra do Ricardo. Vamos continuar aqui, então, com o nosso programa. E aproveitar a apresentação do Ricardo, ele mostrou ali o Vale da Morte. Então, como é que a gente consegue passar esse Vale da Morte? Eu acho que essa é a grande discussão. E chegar, né, em escala dentro das operações. Será que é falta de disciplina, como o Ricardo acabou de falar, né? Será que é falta de maturidade nos projetos, como a Jennifer falou no painel anterior, né? Será que é falha em processo? Será que é problema na tecnologia? Será que é problema nas organizações? Aonde que está faltando? O que está faltando ali para a gente dar esse salto em escala? Tá? A gente trouxe um time de executivos aqui que estão à frente da tomada de decisão desses assuntos. Então, eu vou começar agora a chamar esses convidados para o palco. So, I'll invite our guests to take their seat at the stage. Bob Chaves, Chairman for Northern Spark. John Deselen, Vice President of Product Management for Autonomy and Automation, Caterpillar. Alison Atkins, Chief Projects Development Officer, Anglo-American. E Sérgio Aritzia, Vice President Latam, da Worley. Please. So first of all, thank you very much for being with us here today. It's a pleasure to have you guys here. And maybe I will start with a very straightforward question. We saw in the previous panels a lot of startups being named by Darren, for example, for exploration. We saw some science from ELSA, from MIT. So you have innovation, you have technology development, you have invention, but sometimes you are missing the innovation impact at the site. So what is the point? What is breaking in the way for scale up those innovations, those ideas into the mine operation? Is that a problem of organization, is a problem of technology, is a problem of process? Where is the problem in your opinion? So I would like to listen to each of you. What do you think is the problem for getting the scale?
I guess I can start off. I've been through several implementations of advanced technology, and we always talk about it in terms of people, process, and the right infrastructure to enable the technology to happen and get the most value out of it. And I would say that, typically what I find is that if we try to implement a new technology or really innovate without having some semblance of a process, we typically just get bad results faster. And I think a lot of it becomes cultural. How do we really get the operations folks to come along for the ride on doing something different? We're not typically known as an industry that embraces change, especially at the working level. And so really it's all about how do we do that change management with the people to win the hearts and minds, to get them to believe in where we're going and what we're doing and how we're going to work differently in the future. And when you can do that, it works very well. But if at the lowest level, your people in the mine that are the operators and the maintenance mechanics and the local foreman, if they're not really bought in and they believe in where we're going and that this can work, it will be the biggest stumbling block the whole time.
If I could add, and thank you for the invite. It's fantastic to be here, and it's been a great discussion all day. I think that when it comes to innovation and some of the sort of, if there is a failure, there's a lot of learnings. If you're solving the operator's problem at the beginning, you actually bring in the value. And then with that value, you can build on, and you can build on the sort of change in cultural mindset that, as Bob says, you can really drive the changes that need to come through and just improve ways of working, safety. Actually, if you can make someone's job easier, it's actually really easy to start bringing that innovation through. And so we can think about all these highfalutin, wouldn't that be a great idea? What does AI do for me? When you're actually trying to change a valve in a process shop. But actually the systems that sit underneath that and the approach to that can make a huge difference. So I think if you can win the hearts and minds that way, you go a long way to start really changing the the business.
Maybe a quick add-on. Thank you for inviting me and be here. This has been an incredible conversation all day long. Just to add on top of John and Alison that I completely agree with you, innovation is hard, right? We saw the Death Valley, that is just when things start to go into the relevant environment. And recent studies have shown that successful pilots, 3 out of 4 fail when going into escalation, right? So what is happening there? Usually innovation is done in a controlled environment. When you go into reality, into the operation, it's no longer control, it's super complex with a lot of more variables. You have interfaces, you have integration. So it's no longer technology challenge, it's more of a organizational challenge. So I do agree a lot with what you have said here.
I agree with what everyone said here, but I want to answer the question in a different way, which is, you mentioned some high technology which is coming from the labs, and we're talking about very aggressive, new technologies. And honestly, most industries, it's not just the mining industry that is not prepared to do that. People criticize the mining industry, say, well, you're so conservative. The mining industry is conservative for very good reasons. The cost, the capital is very intensive, the long term, but they are no more conservative than general large industry. And actually, the industrial companies are just as bad, and they don't have the good excuse. So we're talking about the type of innovation there we're talking about is taking some innovation that exists, figuring how it works in the company, and bringing that in. That's real innovation. And most of the innovation will be at that level. At your company, you're one of the most innovative mining companies in the world. And a lot of that innovation is, for example, Caterpillar. You brought autonomous trucks. Well, that comes from Caterpillar. But does it come from Caterpillar? No, it comes from technology that went into the drones and in the military. So the technology from the lab is not going directly into companies. It went from the lab into the drone through DARPA, and then it went in autonomous vehicles in general, and then Caterpillar said, well, we can do that, and we implemented that. So the level of abstraction and difficulty is, but you did a project that took 20 years, and you invented something. That is almost unheard of. So when we're talking about inventing things at the extreme level, this is the work of startups and companies that can basically take the risk for the reward. We also just had another complete outlier. I mean, Ricardo is one of one. I mean, there's very few of you who have done what you've done, but to do that level of innovation is extraordinary. And they basically figured out the only way they can grow the market is by inventing the products. And they've done a fantastic job. So when you saw the valley of death there, that's the valley of death that I'm used to. It's real innovation. And it's very few people who can overcome that valley of death, which is why you work either at the venture level or you work with companies like us, which help you get through. But it is not something for the general industry to be thinking about, how can I do it? But with one exception, and this is why I want to say, what you're doing here with the mining hub is extraordinary. This has never been done in the whole world. And I think it's a wonderful idea, because if you're going to push it, it cannot be done one company at a time. It has to be the industry coming together and say, you know what, we'll take some of these venture capital risks. And we'll do that, and we'll try to foster these companies. And that's a completely different mindset. And I applaud you, and I think that's something that can work, but it's very, very difficult.
So all the answers said a little bit about people, about culture. Change management maybe is something very important. So John, why do you think that the companies are still investing in technology and not that much on changing the way of doing things?
That's a great question. I think there's a couple of reasons for it. I think that we all have a certain belief of technology is going to solve a problem for me, and it can. But you have to change to be able to adapt, to be able to use it. And that seems to be one of the harder things to get across. I think about even like, you mentioned automation in mining, and I've been at the forefront of that for the last 15 years. And what I see is, customers are very eager to adopt the technology, especially from the C-suite level. But when you get into the operational level, they may not be quite as bought in with that, and the customers I see do it right really go through a very detailed change management of that. But it's also difficult for people to recognize, well, this is how we mine. We should just be applying these trucks and doing it with that. And what I find over and over is that is a very specific failure mode for a lot of customers. Because if you're using the technology the same way that you did it before, number one, you're not taking advantage of the technology. And number two, you're probably doing things that actually slow it down. If we all still stuck to having to, we got cell phones and we're able to talk to each other across the world with that, but if we packaged it up and put it in a box and had somebody carry it to the next person to get the message, that's not really quite as effective. So we had to adopt working differently. And I think that it's hard for a lot of our customers to go through that because they just don't know what they don't know. And they don't recognize the volume of change that needs to happen because they're so ingrained in what's happened over time, how they were taught to do the job, and all of those things. And whether it's a brownfield or a greenfield site, people come in with predispositions on what they believe, and it's very hard to change that.
Someone want to add something on that?
I think one of the issues is, from a management perspective, you have a management style where it's all based on optimization, execution, and best practices, which makes all the sense in the world. I was in mining for only 5 years, but I ran a mining company, and I remember you sweat the details, and there is no real innovation. The innovation was minor-ish changes, and you said, what is best practices? That's what you chase. What is the best standardized way of doing it, and then we want to achieve that. But that will bring the industry only to the end, because you can no longer just optimize what you've been doing your whole life. So now we're asking people to radically change, and that change has to be from the top to the bottom. So the same way that what I love about the industry is that safety is done like no other industry. And safety, when I took over the company, I knew nothing about mining, and I brought BHP in to be a partner specifically so we could get best practices. And the thing that I most took away from it was they taught us safety is the most important thing. It starts at the board level and it goes throughout the whole organization. It's not talk, you live it. So here, in order to create this change, you have to change the organization from the top to the bottom, and it's not going to be done in pieces. Like you can't just install this technology of an autonomous truck. The autonomous truck needs to have the AI at the edge, at the location, and all of the systems that go along with it. And all of these are big changes. And if you don't have a buy-in throughout, and then you can ultimately explain that to the workers, why are we doing this, and why is it important, and where are we going, then it fails. And it fails consistently at high rates.
Oh, great. So you said something very important because we need all the levels, right? So walk the talk is very important for leadership as well, right? It's just not saying it's important. You must show that it's important. You need, I think, to communicate very well the value. So identifying, right, Alison, the value from the beginning is something very important. Communicating that value is important for change transformation as well. Please, Alison.
So I'd like to share an example, because I sort of have probably a slightly different view. And I'll use the example of our Quellaveco mine, which you will know very well, John. And we insisted from the top, halfway through that project, that we would use autonomous trucks. Wasn't in the plan. There could have been a lot of resistance. Project director was clearly unhappy because it wasn't in his baseline. But that's it. Now it's been implemented with an integrated operating center connected through. It is the best performing fleet, not just in our in our company, but actually I think in the Caterpillar fleet. Take that the next step forward. So there's a belief, it works, but it takes top-down direction and acceptance against the norm, and this was in 2019, I think, when the decision was made. You then move to a brownfield site, like our Los Bronces site in Chile. The leadership there can go, actually, I want some of that. And it's not one of your trucks, I don't think, either. I think it's a different one. But again, it's sort of, I can see it can work. So the sort of ongoing belief and delivery and competition actually can make this work. And what they've solved in Los Bronces is how you implement an automated truck fleet in an existing mine that's been going for 70 years. And that's mindset, it's change management, but it's also, I have to, because if I don't, I can't compete. I'm not going to grow. My business is going to fail. And so that innovation mindset is one thing, but there's the competitive edge as well. And you can harness that in autonomous drilling rigs. You can do that in terms of the machine learning in your process steps. And then you get into the ecosystem around it. So what do I do with this waste? And we heard on the previous panel, actually, it's just sitting there. In fact, if you heard Ruben earlier on, he was talking about how we're managing to grind our waste in the nickel site up the road and change it into fertilizer. But that's not why we do it. It's because actually it's about carbon sequestration and removing carbon from the mine. So back to the point of, if you can think differently and think about the systems, you actually solve many more things than you realize you're going to. And just one last point on innovation, because I do this to myself. When we think about innovation, we sometimes think it's about breakthrough. It's completely re-engineering how we do something. That's not always the case. It's really about, actually, am I solving this problem? And what are the ways that I can solve it? And if there's a new way of doing it, that's fantastic. So, we're not really solving a haulage problem with autonomous trucks. It's just more efficient, it's safer, it's operationally effective. That's how I would see it.
No, great.
I was just going to add in there, I think that one of the things that, as you implemented that, and I've seen this again, customers that have been successful and end up at a very high performance level. It was, remember, the mine started up in 2020, 2021, right in the middle of COVID.
Yep.
Everybody was on extended long rosters and all of the protocols in place, but you didn't stop and you burned your boats. I mean, it became all the more critical because you couldn't get people to site. These trucks have to run without people. So you didn't have another option, is I think how you looked at it and how you treated it. And I've seen other customers, even if they had that option, purposely choosing to burn their ships and to not, we'll just put people in there and move on for right now. We'll come back later and do it. The customers that do the best don't provide the second option for innovation. They say, we're going to go do this, and they commit and they go do it.
And even if it doesn't turn out right the first time, you continually push. I mean, we've got examples on our coarse particle recovery. We did everything right, by the way. We went through the valley of death, put the module, put the pilot plant in, we learned how to build it. And you know what? The business case was 3 to 5% additional recoveries. We're still sitting at 2 in one of them, but we're not going to give up because we know that actually it drives value. And when we scale it for the next site, we know what we've learned, what we can improve, and the flexi circuit in Los Tortolas, 6%. So that's how you innovate and drive recovery and growth. So that then moves you, sorry, I'm on a bit of an opportunity, but that then moves you to those assets you could never get at before. They were never economical to be able to develop and to recover material from. That's where you start to get value. You can start applying those mindset. Go, well, actually, if you put that into the flow sheet, I can get an additional 6% recovery on top of what my norms would give. Well, that makes that investable, and then you go again. That's what we can start driving.
Great. And you gave some examples of how innovation could come from a greenfield project and a brownfield project, Alison. And when you speak about mining, that's a common word that you use, greenfield and brownfield projects. Do you think that it's easier to innovate on greenfield projects, meaning that you can innovate by design from projects? Or do you believe that retrofitting brownfield operations is too difficult, that you should give up retrofitting actual operations and just go on for greenfield projects? What's your opinion on that?
It does depend on the day that you probably ask me the question and the projects that we're dealing with. It should be easier. In my view, it should be easier on a greenfield because actually you've got a clean sheet of paper, but you're making decisions for an asset. It's going to go 40 years. So the art is, well, how much do I rely on now and know what's coming? But the reality is, and you saw the graph I think Elsa put up earlier, where most of the growth and value is going to come from is coming from our brownfield sites. And so we have to be good at innovating and implementing, I would say, specific system for that site, improvements. And that's where the real capability needs to come from. Not just the solution, but actually, how do you operationalize it? That's really key, and it's underestimated a lot of the time. The sort of the ability to be able to persuade a general manager that you're not actually going to disturb his operations, but this is actually going to make it better, that comes down to the change management. But your question's great, but actually we have to be able to do both. And at the moment, in the near term, brownfield is absolutely fundamental. So everyone has to get good at that.
Great. Please.
I completely agree. Greenfield, logically, it was the place to go, especially in the beginning. You're going to implement a new idea. You're not going to implement it everywhere. So the greenfield, it's a natural and makes complete sense. But now we're past that stage with autonomous vehicles, for example. So growing that beyond, I actually think that it all comes down to you want to basically not just have autonomous, but more connectivity, sensorizing, and you want to do that throughout the organization, brownfield, greenfield. How do you get that done where you're getting complete buy-in? And I think the answer is going through the idea of safety. And basically going down to the worker level, sensorizing them, making them part of the technology, basically sensorizing and connecting the non-autonomous fleet. And then maybe in some 5-year period you can think of retrofitting. That's a long time from now. But just sensorizing them, and from a safety perspective, you know where they are, not just where all the autonomous vehicles are, vis-a-vis the people. You create that, and now you now have a system which is complete, and then you can start driving efficiency through having that system. Because if you're going to do that level of, you're going to ultimately really push AI to the edge and build the systems, rather than today you're doing an autonomous, truck project. It needs to get into the brownfield, and I think safety could be the way.
Great. And so, Sergio, when does the project really dies? Is when you are going to hand over that from innovation to the operation? It's because operation never owns the innovation? Is the fear of failure that you speak about innovation, you must be used to failure, right? Is the fear of failure, where does the problem resides?
So I will not say that is where that project dies or innovation dies, but it is that moment where real problems start. And it makes sense because when innovation transitions into operation, the incentives are different. From one side, you have speed, go to market, trying new technologies from the innovation team, but then you have operation that goes into reliability, security, safety, productions. So you need to make both work, and in order to do so, to have a clear transition of ownership from one to the other. And I think that a good test, in my experience, has been like who owns the budget for the next year, so who's going to pay for it, and how to avoid this, to fade into this transition. In my opinion, what I have seen is that people that involve operations really early and make them co-own the solution, and also making the operation team to have a budget for for innovation permanence, so to account for the continuous cost of integration until it gets into deployment, that is how you avoid a failure transition from one team to the other.
For example, please go ahead.
I was just going to add that I think it's really the times I've seen it very successful. There's typically somebody from operations that's seconded into the project team, so that when you go to implement this and turn it over to operations, there's somebody that's already really been exposed to it. And I do think that it's a large, we talk about that handover from project to operations, and I think that really is where the essential change management has to happen. And you've got to make sure that you have the right change agents identified, who are the targets, who's the champion. I mean, that is just critical at that time. And the more you've got one or two people that have been seconded into the project from the beginning, I find that tends to help really make it come to life out in the field.
That's an excellent point. I come from an innovation company, and what we do is we create innovation for the biggest companies. They can't do it themselves. It's something that's very hard, and it's because of the silos. So they go through the valley of death, and it's the handover from marketing to design there has to go through so many silos. By the time it just has to fail in one, and the whole project dies. And so that is why large companies do not innovate. I mean, it's not that your industry doesn't innovate. It's large companies cannot innovate because of that. So our secret as an innovation firm is we have everyone in the team from start to finish. Insights, design, all the different types of engineers, and then finally the prototypers that actually make it. They're involved in the process from start to finish, so they understand where the problem. So maybe one of the engineers is working on something, and he knows that in the early stages of Insights, they interviewed, a group of housewives that this is a product for, and there was a particular issue that they all agreed on, and so the design of the thing needed to address that, not just what they consider beautiful design. It was like, how would you engineer that? And then, so the designer had to design it the way that the customers ultimately wanted, and the engineers had to make that fit into what was designed, because it was designed not just because it was pretty, it was designed because it was addressing a customer issue.
Oh, great. And I heard some very interesting things, because maybe what is important to operations is a little bit different what was important before. And Edison said about, for example, you have a project that you aimed for 5%. At the beginning, you are maybe at 2%, 3%. But how can you persist on pursuing that final result? And how that cannot be viewed as a failure? But because sometimes when you are developing that, 2%, when you get 2%, it's fine, because I know I will get eventually to 5. But when you bring that to operation, the operation may see that as a failure. But no, you said 5 and it's 2, it doesn't work.
It's funny, isn't it? We talk about it as a failure, whereas actually I see that as a learning.
Yeah.
And if we didn't go through all those hoops and learning, then we wouldn't have these things that we all use. And we have to remember that as senior leaders, when we're driving the sort of need to encompass and embrace what's coming. We know it's coming. It's just how do you develop it? And as leaders of the big corporates, I'm trying not to jibe at the big companies can't innovate. I agree to a point. They innovate by partnering with organizations like yourselves, and organizations and the big mining are able to actually have innovation and technology development houses within their organizations to think about this thing and think about how best to access it. In terms of that understanding, whether it's linking in with MIT and the universities, all the way through into spin-outs from them as well. The issue I always say with innovation is it's a bit like Duff projects. You sort of overpromise and underdeliver.
Perfect.
And so the skill of being able to, it's not like you can say, well, look, the small print is it might not meet 5% straight away. It's 2%, but promise me we'll get there. That doesn't always work. It's a case of saying, well, look, we can definitely get to 2%. probably 3. The aim is 5, and it pays itself back at 3, and actually, when you look at it, it should get to whatever. But being very clear on those objectives and building a winning team around that, which encompasses the operations, and it's the pull from them. And one of the things that we've really worked on within our organisation is we're very technical, very engineering. So everyone's got great ideas, but it's the best ideas that win. So how do you harness those best ideas from everyone? The art of and the culture of your organisation goes to that in terms of what wins, in terms of where the investment's going to go. It's a small pot of investment, so it needs to meet those criteria.
Great.
It certainly is not all firms, because here we're sitting with Caterpillar, who's one of the great innovators of bringing autonomy into this heavy industry. This is a truly remarkable change. Here we have one of the most innovative mining companies in the world. So we're talking about various types of innovation, but including research innovation of creating something. That's next level. And then Ricardo, which is basically doing, another level of, I mean, that's truly exceptional. So you are the exceptions to the rule of large companies being able to do it. So there is a general problem, and you should be very proud of being the exception.
I do think, Allison, you keyed in on something there that I think I want to just expand on. You've got to give the team the right to win without hitting perfection, right? Like you gave them the right at 2%. Okay, that's good. 3% it pays back, But let's not stop there. Let's try to get to 5. Let's see where we can go. And I think that the other part of it that really resonates with me is, and I've been thinking a lot about this, especially as we apply AI. AI is not something that comes out and has a rules-based system that says, boom, here's the answer you asked for. What you find is that you actually want to interrogate it further and progress its learning and progress its refinement of what you want. And that's really how we need to think more about some of these innovation projects, is not, this is the number, we're going to go get it, it's a bold goal, and if we don't, we fail. We need to figure out, how do we set some intermediate steps in there? No, we don't lose that bold goal, but we give the team the ability to say, you know what, we did this and that's paid itself back, this is good. Now, let's not stop. How do we iterate? How do we continue to refine it and get that last little bit out? And I think that's something that we've got to get a lot more comfortable for, because I know we've all put business cases together that say, I'm going to do this and it pays that. Well, you're either sandbagging, where you undershoot what you're going to be able to hit, or you put something out there so bold that you kind of secretly know inside, I can't make it. So finding that way to articulate, progress, not perfection, I think, and allowing the team to do that is critical on innovation.
Yeah, that's great. And actually, this is a little bit of culture. Understanding about that, a little bit of culture, right? I'll move to the next block, that what really works. But before that, Alison, you brought very interesting examples, and I would like to make you a difficult question. Bring an example of failure that you were involved on a project of innovation that failed, and why it failed.
Well, there's many, but there's lots of learnings that I've got in for the future. But I think one of them is that as Anglo-American, we looked at the hydrogen truck. We got a prototype working. I mean, the driver for the truck was we needed a self-propelling, a replacement for diesel, and we didn't want to constrain it with catenaries and battery charging and everything else. So what did you do? And so the prototype worked. We actually had it working around one of our open pits. The reason it failed and we stopped, or what we learned from it rather than failure, is you have to have the whole system behind it. And when you're doing something so advanced, if you haven't got the infrastructure, which is where's the hydrogen coming from? If it's liquid, how am I going to produce it? Why am I producing it? Why aren't the normal producers that you'd expect to produce it? And guess what? It's hard. And then the next thing is you need a reliable energy and infrastructure behind it. And so the real learning from that is the idea and concept was fantastic. The partners were there. It will come back. It's just ahead of its time, I would say. But you have to have and understand all the enablers that go with it. And I would say that the real lesson for us is we went alone and we should have partnered. And we've really changed our thinking around this. There are some core areas which we will always innovate and we will hold on to from an IP perspective. But where I come from, I've only been in the mining industry for 3 years. I've spent the majority of my year in defense, most of my career in defense, and you learn to innovate on particular things and partner through a massive ecosystem of SMEs. And what I found interesting around the mining industry is that we weren't so good on that. I couldn't understand it. And so hunting out those SMEs and those spin-outs has been a real effort for me and my team as part of the innovation and technology development aspects that we have. But that's the learnings, I would say, from it.
Great, thank you, Alison. So two very important things. Integration is very important. It's not only the truck, it's the surroundings of the truck as well. And you mentioned something that Ricardo Lima just mentioned in his presentation, that is connection with people that know something that you don't know. So making that connection is very important too. Great, thank you very much. And Sergio, what differentiates a company that is successful in scaling up something from another company that gets stuck on pilots and stuff like that?
This is a great question, but I don't think there is one silver line on one only question, one only answer that will define every single winner from the companies that have actually failed in implementing some scale at the escalation of the innovation. In my experience, what I have seen are some common themes that have presented in each one of the winners. And I think that the first one is to put the correct incentives. And when I say incentives, is making sure to diminish the cost of risk-taking and at the same time increasing the cost of doing nothing, of standing still, right? You need to make some incentive for innovation to become important. Then second is really important to bring operations early and think about innovation not as a technology implementation, but as a business value creation solution, right, that you need to implement. And I will say that third, it's important to have the right culture and leadership commitment. So you really need to lead by example, set up and reduce friction and interaction because along different business units. At the same time, budgeting not only for the pilot, but also for the implementation, right? For the transition where you're scaling the pilot.
No, great. And we are reaching the end of the panel. Actually, I think we covered only 20% of the questions. I think we need another 2 hours here to discuss about that. But I would like to end this panel with a question to you all. You are all C-level executives here. What do you think is the role of leadership on scaling up innovation?
Well, I talked a lot about having that belief in, through the process. And I think as leaders, that's one of the most important things we can do is to really show our belief in what we're doing. And, and again, but set realistic goals that can be achieved so that the team feels accomplished when they get there, but don't let them stop when they do.
Be the champion and pick the teams up when they falter and just give them the hope because you believe in them.
I would say create the framework, in addition to what you say that I completely agree, create the framework to innovation to flourish. So that means giving the operation team the confidence that they need to implement, and at the same time the discipline to execute this in a transition rigorous way, to plan from the innovation team towards the operational team.
All of that, but at top management, you have to give them the budget, the support. You can't tell the operator, say, oh, go do this project, but you still have to do everything else and come up with the best possible cost. But I'm throwing this project on you, and it might fail, but that's on you. It's completely irresponsible. So top management has to make this a complete project from start to finish, including the funding, so that the operators don't get stuck with the problems and the potential failures. If it fails at all levels.
Great. So there's so much that leadership can do to scale up innovation. Thank you very much for this panel, and I hope you have a next one next year. Thank you.
Thank you.